All right, a couple of slides ago, we were talking about the basis, and we said that the basis actually typically follows a historical and a seasonal pattern. So let's dive into a couple of graphs and look at that and kind of evaluate that further. So the basis tends to vary within the marketing year for grain, oilseed crops, and livestock. So that basis it tends to vary within that marketing year for these commodities, or for all commodities, really. It tend that the trends, but the trends tend to be constant over time, and this provides opportunities for those who understand the patterns. So we know that these patterns are going to kind of follow the same pattern year after year. There's going to be seasonal patterns. They tend to be, and these seasonal patterns will tend to be constant over the course of several years. It might vary within the year, but they tend to be constant year after year. So let's actually look at the 5 and 10-year average of soybeans. So we're looking at this first graph right here. This first graph is actually the 5 and 10-year average of soybean basis, and we notice something. So the darker line, this black line, is this 5-year average. It's a 5-year running average. Now, this dotted line is a 10-year average. And as we kind of go through it, what do we notice about it? Well, we notice that they follow the same general pattern over whether it's a 5-year or a 10-year average. That goes to show, ladies and gentlemen, that with some minor discrepancies, that this basis tends to follow the same seasonal pattern, or the same patterns year over year. But we notice that it varies throughout the year, like as we look from August to September. And actually, if we go all the way back from basically May, if we go from May to September, we notice that basis is actually strengthening. And whether you're dealing with the 5-year average or the 10-year average, you notice that basis is actually strengthening over that particular time. So who would actually stand to benefit from this? Who would be enjoying this aspect about this basis strengthening? Well, it's the short hedgers. Remember, those short hedgers, they prefer for that basis to be strengthening. Those short hedgers do. They want that basis to be strengthening. So if you're a short hedger and you can understand this aspect, you're standing to benefit from that aspect, that the basis is rising, that seasonal commodity basis rises. But if we look at from September to November, we see that every year that basis actually weakens, and that it'll strengthen from November basically through January, then kind of hold steady and go up and down over the course of that. So understanding these seasonal patterns and historical trends can actually help these producers and agribusiness personnel to make the proper forward contracting, hedging, and production decisions, and be able to weigh out that aspect of how much is this commodity change in this basis actually going to affect me if I forward contract, or if I engage in the futures contract. Now, let's look at the basis for feeder cattle, because the basis is substantially different for alternative weight classes. So if you look down here at this bottom graph, this is the basis for feeder cattle, and we have some lightweight cattle of 400 to 500 pounds, 5 to 6 weight, 6 to 7 weight. So we have the 4 to 5 weight, that is this dotted line up here. The 5 to 6 weight is this gray solid line, and then this black line down here is the 6 to 700 weight. So we see that the seasonal patterns, these seasonal patterns tend to hold true for the most part. They tend to kind of rise. The local basis, or the commodity basis, is rising, kind of hits a peak and then begins to fall off starting around middle of May, June. That commodity basis will actually kind of dip off. And we see that tend to happen across all three of these weight classes. But if we look right here in the beginning, you have this 6 to 7 weight basis actually increasing here, decreasing there, but increasing up here in the lightweight calves. So we are noticing that these seasonal patterns will actually vary based off of weight class. And the feeder cattle basis is affected by things like feed costs and fed cattle prices. So if we actually look at this, no wonder that there is a larger discrepancy for the lighter weight calves than we get down here. So, if we were to just run basically a running average across these, we would see that this one goes up, peaks, and then falls back down. Whereas the heavier weight calves, we see it kind of increase and then go right back down with very little rise and very little fall. Versus if we look at the lighter weight calves, we see a more of a drastic change within our basis. Well, why might that be happening? Well, it might be it's part of the aspect such as feed cost. Because of these lighter weight calves, it's going to take them longer on feed. That basis is going to be affected a lot more by those corn prices and the forward contract and the futures contracts of the corn prices. It's also going to be affected by fed cattle prices. And because it's going to take a lot longer to get these particular cattle, the lighter weight ones, to market weight, it's going to show a wider or a larger change in that basis over the time. Especially if you look down at this bottom one, that the basis is fairly stable over time for these heavier weight calves. But one thing to notice is that all three of them follow the same general pattern with some changes. I mean, they're not exactly the same, but different weight classes are actually going to have different basis tied to them within the same general commodity. Basically, different grades are. So overall, by knowing these historical and seasonal patterns, we can actually look at when is the commodity basis going to be strengthening? When is it typically going to be narrowing? And we can actually use that to our advantage whenever we're forward pricing and making these future contracts. And like it says up here, it helps these producers and agribusinesses make proper forward contracting, hedging, and production decisions by actually knowing how these local bases, these commodity bases work over several years.